Hey everyone, we're at 2:01, so we'll kick this off. This is Heidi Muyeso, comes with the Community Rural Development Institute at Cornell University, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on engaging constructively with controversial public issues. This is the second of 5 webinars in our spring 2009 series on sustainable communities in an ever-changing context. At the end of today's webinar, we'll share a list of the other webinars in this series, both past, which are on an online archive, and information about registering for ones that we have coming up in the next couple of months. So for those of you who did not participate in the first webinar or may not be familiar with the Sustainable Communities series, I just want to mention that it was developed with the recognition that we're in a time of both great opportunities and challenges for communities, and the series is really designed to provide an overview on issues and topics that are of interest to the communities in New York State. And it's really targeted to extension educators, other community developers, as well as legislators and other local leaders. With each webinar, we try to bring together a campus-based research or extension professional, community-based practitioner, and an agency representative to really provide you with an overview of the subject matter and resources for further information from all of those perspectives. So today, I want to thank David Kay and Rod Howe, who are also with the Community and Rural Development Institute, and Marilyn Wyman of Cornell Cooperative Extension of Greene County for being today's presenters. Before giving them the floor, I want to briefly outline their presentation for today. Rod Howe is up first, and Rod will introduce the general topic of public issues education, provide a brief history of it within CCE, and outline why it is an important core competency for community and economic developers, again, including extension educators. David will come in next, sharing a bit of his background in working with communities grappling with controversial issues, outlining the different approaches to addressing these issues in communities, and then the core competencies that public issues educators should have to work with communities. Marilyn will follow David and share specific examples of her work with communities confronted with controversial topics. Then she'll briefly discuss some of the approaches she's used. And finally, we'll wrap up with David, who will share some information about a new curriculum that's under development by a team of extension professionals nationally. The curriculum is designed to help extension educators and other community developers to be prepared for working with communities to address controversial issues. We will follow up with a general question and answer period, but encourage you to send questions that you may have as they come up, particularly if they're clarifying questions. So if somebody said something that you didn't get, please email us a note and we'll try to tackle it right at that time. Otherwise, we'll try to save the majority of the questions for the end, but may have a couple breaks when we can entertain some throughout. So send them along as you get them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rod.
Thanks, Heidi. Good afternoon, everyone. And just in reference to the question I see up there, I do not believe posted handouts. We actually find it better to just email resources after the fact. I think it's easier than people trying to pull them down from the webinar. I don't think there would be a lot of resources this time that we'll be posting afterwards. David may be mentioning there are some hard copies of resources that we still have that if folks are interested, we can mail out. David, will you be mentioning those in your presentation?
I'll be mentioning them in your presentation.
Okay.
But
Great.
I'll also mention that there's a website that we'll refer you to that has quite a bit of information on it as well.
Okay.
And organized.
Heidi, if you could go to the next slide. I would encourage you as I start talking to type in controversial public issues that your communities are facing, whether extension has been involved or not. You go to the next one. Yeah. Just so people can see what others are facing in their communities. This slide suggests, I just want to clarify something that Heidi said. We do not see this being of value to just community and economic vitality educators. I think it's of value to all educators, and I use the term educators broadly to include both CCE educators as well as those with other organizations and associations who do education. So when we use the term educators, I think we're not just focused on CCE.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think
developers and so.
And I think that for those of you who haven't participated in webinars before, the chat information gets captured as well, so folks can see what you're typing in as issues that your communities are dealing with. But certainly we know that the controversial public issues cover land use, water quality, food safety, economic development, healthcare, a whole range of issues. And so a few that I just called to mind for which Extension has played a role are the ones you see listed here. That's why I've asked you to type in additional ones, because we know this is just a subset of the full range of things that Extension might be called upon to help communities negotiate. We thought that it was timely to remind educators and their partners about the resources related to public issues education. There is a research base. Ellen Hahn, who had been here at Cornell, had been actually a key person. This is probably back in the 10 years ago, beyond that. So you might still find some publications from Ellen Hahn, H-A-H-N, and I believe that you'll find some resources related to Ellen on the PI website that David will refer to later on. I recall that about 10 years ago, in fact it was 10 years ago, that several Cornell colleagues joined forces to offer a satellite teleconference on public issues education, and we'll talk, I think, a little bit about the terminology on what we mean by public issues education or other phrases that we can use. That material is still valid, but I would say somewhat forgotten. So this is timely to just call our attention back to that. I see that, Heidi, can you just give us an overview of what some folks, well, everyone can see it, so you don't have to say what people have typed in. But what I want to suggest that all these issues have in common are that they tend to be multidisciplinary. That is, they tend to be complex issues. They are often politically divisive. Some of the issues you'll have differing views from, quote, the experts on what is the right way to address a particular issue. So it leaves educators sometimes in a difficult position knowing which, quote, expert to listen to. And we certainly know that there have been issues here in New York State for which, even from the Cornell University campus, there's been differing perspectives from faculty members. Oftentimes these issues, because they're divisive, require or suggest that there needs to be a rebuilding of relationships at the community level. And certainly a goal is trying to come up with sustainable solutions. By the way, I'm pulling directly from a very nice booklet that, again, I think David will mention, and it's on the website. It was pulled together by an Extension National Public Policy Education Committee. Educators should be positioned so that they can bring the knowledge and the skills necessary to help citizens and local officials make sound public choices amid uncertainty and conflict. And this suggests here the relationship back to the issue of community sustainability. As Heidi said, this is one of the webinars that are part of this series on community sustainability. For those of you who may have participated in January's webinar on community sustainability, there is a phrase in the definition on community sustainability that I shared having to do with community members having a say in shaping their future. And that's very much what this is about, is making sure that community members have a voice and are engaged in the process. Next. Okay. The objectives of such a process are to increase citizens' knowledge about issues, to assist citizens and local officials in determining appropriate and effective strategies for public decision making. It's really has a design component to it. David may refer to it as community decision making. That's another term that we've often used. And it does imply that you step back and really think about the process for engaging the public and how you're going to bring in information and how you're going to work with that information to come up with potential strategies. and certainly building the skills and providing opportunities to enhance participation in the decision-making process. I would say that the overall goal is better informed decision-making. Next. Guiding principles include that this has a high value on civic democracy. There's a high priority on the right of community members to have a voice in public policy decisions that will affect them. And learned. It has a specific way to think about the scientific information that might be brought to bear on these topics. Scientific information cannot substitute for value choices, nor can science identify the most appropriate set of values. However, scientific information can more fully inform the choices that citizens and communities make. Public policy researchers and educators do not possess the wisdom by virtue of superior education or scientific knowledge to decide what is best for the public, but it certainly has a role for science-based and researched information. One way that we often talk about this is there's differing kinds of knowledge, including local knowledge at times that needs to be brought to the table on these issues. We can send this as an attachment if folks would like a version of it later. I'm not going to try to totally unpack this very busy slide, but it does suggest the process and design elements of community decision making. It offers the ranges of public involvement along the bottom, and it also offers the ranges of the role of educators on the vertical axis. What's in this slide recalls for me the work that Scott Peters has done in profiling extension educators and their work around key community issues. His most recent book was called Catalyzing Change. In fact, I think Marilyn was one of the ones highlighted. What's that? Okay, in that book. So, oftentimes local officials, just depending on the issue at hand, might be most interested in just informing the public and sharing some expert information without creating opportunities for dialogue. But oftentimes these issues really do suggest that there needs to be more input from the public. So there you see the range at the bottom. And my guess is David will go into some of the roles of educators. But again, oftentimes educators are called to bring that expert information. But there's a whole range of roles that we can play that also go toward the upper ends of the scale, which would include convening, facilitating, and managing processes. And this is not to suggest that it's appropriate for Extension or other educators to get involved in every controversial public issue. I think there needs to be discussion to decide, is this an issue for which Extension or whatever agency is well situated to play this kind of role. I think there's very valid reasons where at times an Extension association or another community organization may say, no, this isn't really the right issue for us to get. So I don't know that we're really going to talk about that decision-making process very much in the context. But we can suggest down the road if anyone wants to have individual conversations with Dave on this issue. Next.
That's Alan Hans. This is that last little thing that popped on is a publication by Ellen Hahn. I can't see it on my screen, but I could when I was at my computer. But I put that up there partly because it really offers quite a detailed explanation of the part of the graph you're looking at that has the curly cues on it, heading into the distance, which is about the stages of the public issue cycle. This was used quite extensively in Extension some years ago and probably isn't that much anymore. We do have piles of this document left over, so if anybody wants one or more copies of it, please let us know and we'd be happy to ship them to you.
And I can send out a reminder for that
Okay,
afterwards as
great.
well.
I think this is really at the heart of the matter. If the answers were simple and it was just a matter of checking yes or no, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But most of the issues facing our communities, certainly the issues that have a more controversial aspect to them, are not simple. And this is from a postcard that Penn State developed. And on the back of the postcard, which I'm not showing you, it talks about gas leasing and the Marcellus Shale. So it says you wouldn't need us if the answers were simple. And it talks about Penn State being there to provide educational forums, objective information, and expert guidance, both on content and process. So I really, I was struck by their postcard. I thought it was catchy, and I thought it helped set the stage for today's discussion. Yep.
I think it's neat. We're just switching chairs here. What do I push? Stuck. Okay. All right. Rod referred earlier to the we're using the term public issues education, but there is a lot of other terminology out there. The topic that we're covering really relates to. A couple minutes on that. I'll first talk about some history within extension itself. At least as far as I can tell, there was an initial group of educators that used the term public policy education. And that term was really focused, I think, trying to capture the notion that what educators did was policy relevant topics. That then shifted probably in the early 90s in particular to the use of the terminology which we're using now, which is public issues education. And I think the deliberate intention in doing that was kind of thought of as a subset of policy education. And the intention in doing it was really to highlight essentially the different kind of role that the educator took there. It was not so much, it was really trying to help people think through the issues. And the emphasis was on the role of the educator in helping people think through the issues. There was, in the mid to late 90s, there was a group of us that were involved in a national conference that was about public issue dispute resolution, which was really and even more focused on really the intersection between the dispute resolution profession and the educational professionals, and trying to look at those issues. Most recently, there's been a proposal amongst, actually by Steve Daniels, who I'll introduce to you. At least I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. And some of his colleagues to try and put a broader frame around all of these topics and really think of them as discourse-based approaches. The notion being here that there's some kind of discourse or dialogue that's common to all of these topics that are up there now that have been within extension, and that somehow I don't know if you can see that, that somehow we're making progress in how we think about all of these things by changing the names and changing the subtleties along them. Steve is also very interested in adding a sort of a more theoretical underpinning to what we're doing. Some of this was very pragmatic, very practical oriented. He's been really trying to develop a theoretical underpinning. Some of us feel has been missing. Rod, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to say, but I think they are subtleties, David. I think
Yes.
that it doesn't change the core values and principles.
I agree. I mean, there's kind of different flavors of the same thing is the way I think of it. What I just threw onto the screen was, if you step outside extension in particular, although some of these terms are also used within extension in various contexts, there are literally dozens and dozens of terms, of approaches that come out of different traditions, different disciplines, and so on that really overlap very significantly with what we're talking about. And part of the reason for putting these up there is the expectation that you will recognize and feel comfortable with at least some of these because you've used them yourself or you've run across them. As I was putting the PowerPoint together, I happened to run across an article from last November in the New Yorker that seemed like it was very pertinent to the topic today, so I wanted to throw that in front of you. And the reason I think it might be timely is because it is a description of the way our new president thinks about what his role is and what doing business is that I think overlaps. And this is actually just an excerpt from this article in the New Yorker. Someone named Cass Sunstein suggesting that the governing philosophy of an Obama administration is the idea of deliberative democracy. This goes back very directly to this notion of using discourse to address problems. Sunstein is actually now an official in the Obama administration. Obama used that term in The Audacity of Hope, and I think the definition that I've highlighted there in red is interesting. A conversation among adults who listen to one another, who attempt to persuade one another by means of argument and evidence, and who remain open to the possibility that they could be wrong. The latter part is often missing, especially in Washington. Even at the university, if you can believe it or not. And I also wanted to highlight a little later in that paragraph the notion of the prerequisites for deliberative democracy, including an educated citizen. It's essentially about capacity. You have to have people who have both the education and the resources to engage in this kind of deliberative democracy to make it meaningful. There's more that kind of goes back, if you want to look at that later, about how Lincoln got the same kind of thing, because that validates it even more if Lincoln did it, right? And there's the reference for the New Yorker issue. So there is a national group of educators that have consistently been. Hi. Okay. There's a group of us that have been looking at the public issues education topic for some time, did a lot of work on it in the 90s, and I'll be talking more about the work they're doing now. And from the website that I'll show you later, and from some of the material that Rod already referenced, I'm giving you the consensus definition of public issues education, which is the term that I'll be using throughout the rest of the presentation. The educational process of informing and assisting people to improve group decisions about pressing and emerging issues that affect them and their communities. You can see that's rather broad. It's meant to be broad. It's meant to encompass many of those other techniques and approaches and names that were on a previous screen. And I'm moving along. That is the first time that I throw up the website that a lot of this material is on. I'll also have it on later, so that it is just www.publicissueseducation.net. Unfortunately, we don't think very easily or display information very easily in 4 or 5 or 6 dimensions, so I'm going to put up a different version of the three-dimensional graphic that Rod put up earlier. It has one aspect of it in common, which is the first axis there, which is about the educator's interaction with the public, the way that the educator moves from a spectrum. On this axis, we have information provider at the bottom, mediator at the top, but there are a lot of other terms that can go on there. It really is intended to characterize the nature of the interaction with the public. On the bottom is the types of outcomes that you're looking for. This is on the horizontal axis. And again, it ranges from, on the left-hand side, increased awareness of issues. This is very, for most of us, a very comfortable kind of goal, to a much more complex process of trying to assist a group coming to some kind of consensus decision. Requires quite a bit more work, and not more work, but a different kind of work that you're going to do with the group. Different access heading off there into the distance, which is the level of conflict which is involved. And what this is, I should add that this is, you can see at the bottom that this is still a work in progress of this group. They haven't finalized this, and all of us can see things that are still kind of wrong with it. But the attempt with this is to map in this three-dimensional space some of the kinds of techniques that were listed previously when we threw all those names up in front of you. And, you know, the take-home message really here is that there are different kinds of approaches, techniques to use in different kinds of situations, and those vary with at least these three axes and the one that Rod had on earlier about Al Hahn's stages of an issue cycle. In some ways, this is very complex. Start getting down to the details, and someone who's steeped in these things has actually had quite a number of tools at their fingertips that they can draw on to apply at the right time in the right place. And Rod wanted to say something.
Certainly, I know that at times the best approach is when it's a team approach. So it would be unreasonable, say for instance, that you have some expert information on whatever the issue is. It would probably not be appropriate for you to also be the one trying to lead the process. So you might team up if you've got sort of research-based information to bring to a topic. You might want to link up with like the dispute resolution center staff to manage more of the process. Or there might be times that Extension doesn't have the research-based information, and they end up being more of the facilitator convener, and somebody else brings in so these can be discrete roles as well, and that's part of, I think, thinking it through up front.
So I should mention that this is, I usually do this kind of presentation with with people in front of me, and it's a bit of an experiment to see how it's going. You can see anybody's faces. But I am going to ask you, since Rod did it so successfully at this point, to look over this list of educators and try for a little bit of interaction here. If you could type in either which of these possible roles you personally either need some explanation of, or what I was going to ask is ones that you feel comfortable with yourself. It would be interesting, I think, to look and see what kinds of things you all, in your roles in a day-to-day job situation, feel comfortable taking on. And I'm not going to really go through this list trying to explain what each one is. I don't have the time to do that unless you have specific questions about some of this terminology. But I will point out that there is quite a spectrum of different types of activities. And I'll also point out that I think one of the things that Scott Peters has done so well in his work in the book that Rod mentioned earlier, and I'm hoping that Marilyn will talk about in a little bit, is helping us understand that in our roles as educators, we often do some elements of many of these kinds of we take on many of these roles, I guess is what I want to say, even when we're not necessarily thinking of them as being the primary or formal part of our job responsibilities. Anybody typing anything in yet? So no. So nobody's comfortable with anything. Okay. You're a bunch of slackers out there, obviously. Okay, well, we'll move on. Does that mean they can't hear me?
No, okay, no.
Okay. I lost my audio.
You have to mention.
Just in case other people, okay, Sean thinks he's done them all. I believe it. Okay, good for you, Sean. Okay, I think many of you have done a number of them. Probably some of you have not done all of them.
I think the one that we often don't, we probably do, but we don't recognize that we're doing it is, go back from there.
Okay.
Is the program designer, where we actually sort of think through what should the process look like to bring maximum information, and if the goal is to have maximum community input and dialogue, how do you structure that? So that's probably the one that most folks wouldn't identify.
Okay, back in the mid '90s, we had a group that on and off campus that was doing some research on these issues, and part of what we did was a survey of all the counties, all the county cooperative extension offices, and phone interview actually, trying to identify the extent and nature of public issues education work that was going on in the counties, and in the context of the roles, something strange happened to one of those terms, but in the context of the roles, we were trying to see, based on the number of issues the educators were involved in, how frequently did they take on some of these roles. So providing information and speaker at event, those are what I think of as probably the more traditional role of delivering information, sort of a what, it's not strictly one way because there's always Q&A and those kinds of contexts. But in general, this is a more traditional role that has been played. A lot of people feel the most comfortable in a university context. However, and providing information was mentioned more often than any of the other topics. This next group of that I put the arrows next to now, I'm putting in I'm sort of summarizing them as most of them have something to do with concern about process. And I think it's notable that while the numbers are lower on many of these than they were for the other activities, quite a substantial spread across all of them. And then the final category is the trainer role, actually going. And there is more, what you'll see is there is a larger number of technical training, but there was still a significant number that process skills. And there is this table is taken out of a publication that David Pelletier from Nutrition and some other people did. Adult learning. Moving on to the next slide, if it works. Okay, I just highlighted again there was both a process skill, namely facilitation, and a content skill, provide information, that were the two highest ranked activities or roles that were assumed. Now I'm going back to the sort of the work that's been done by the National Public Issues Education Group, and I'm going to just quickly tick off what they list as what they consider core competencies. And there is a document on the website that both lists these and goes into much more detail about what these competencies involve. So the idea, I think, as Rod said here, is that if you were a perfect public issues education educator, you would be able to do all of these yourself in a outstanding manner. However, since almost everybody I've met involved in this work is human or near human, most of the time we have to collaborate with others, and in fact, the first competency that's listed there is creating partnerships, and I think that means both partnerships around issues and with other educators to sort of supplement your own skill set with other people on a team that works on these things. If you're fortunate, you'll have people that you can do that with. Working with data, also critical. Something, again, that many of us directly out of a university setting have a lot of training in. Not everybody. Designing programming. This is, again, what Rod was just mentioning earlier. Communication skills. Most of us, I think too many of us actually take for granted our ability to communicate well, and have not, most of us have not had any kind of formal training in how to do that. And even those of us who have had training occasionally are prove to ourselves that we can fail miserably at it. Facilitating group discussion and decision making. Again, if you'll remember, that was one that many of the educators responding to the survey said that they do. Managing and transforming conflict. And to some extent, this is the one that I think, not just within extension, but within the human family, most of us are most uncomfortable dealing with, and to some extent motivates a lot of the work that we're doing here. Working with scientific and technical information. I'll be talking more about this topic later. Obviously one which is particularly important for those of us in a university setting, as we're trying to put knowledge to work, as the saying goes. And creating an environment of professionalism. This has just a lot to do with how people interact with each other. And this list is on the Public Issues Education website I mentioned earlier, and this is actually the full URL that gets you to the list and a greater level of discussion about it. That was just me being cute, sorry. This really just is an effort to emphasize, I think, what Rod already brought up, which is that that your ability to engage any one of these competencies or the skills that were mentioned, it has to be contextualized. It's not always true in every situation, no matter who you are, that you can just do. And I think it's, my own sense is it's more important to understand the importance of the competencies and the roles than to try to master them all. Because if you understand them, you can sort of collectively help figure out what the group needs to do to move ahead. One of the so you're in a pretty powerful position in a way, even if you can't do it, if you understand that part of the problem this group is having is because we don't have someone who can play the role of a convener of a group and make that suggestion and try and move group into a decision about, or sometimes you can do it yourself, about trying to get somebody new involved whose skills or role is really unable to be played by anybody. I think I already emphasized the second point, which is, it's really I'd say particularly with an extension, whatever job you're in, you have to think about both who you are as a person in terms of what your history is with the players and what skills you represent. You also have to think about what institution you represent and what your physical presence represents in terms of race, class, gender, all those kinds of things, because they will affect your ability to educate and communicate around issues. Some issues it won't matter very much, some other issues it might matter a whole lot. Some of that is related to the issue I've highlighted below about neutrality, or it's even more important, not that you are neutral per se, but that you are perceived as neutral. Guess what? You can't really tell just by introspection whether or not you're being perceived as being neutral. It really helps to get some feedback on that. Look for evidence that your perception perceptions on that are in accordance with other people's perceptions. And I also like to highlight that sometimes it's actually not neutrality in some roles that's so important, but rather the sense that you're being fair. You may have an opinion. Unless you're being brought in as a neutral outsider, most of us are in roles where we do have some history, where we are involved in a role in an institution. And it's not always perceived as being wholly neutral. That doesn't mean that you throw up your hands always and say, you can't do anything. Because I think you can play some of these roles if you're transparent and are perceived as being fair, even if it's clear that you do have some kind of position. Although I think you're always in more, from a process point of view, and even from a delivery of content, you're always in, on shakier ground and you have known history, because people will interpret what you're saying through the sense of you having some bias or not. So again, the big question for most of us is, which we can't answer for you because it depends on context, is what role you are able to play in a given context. I will point out finally that in the section that on the website, there is a competency checklist that you can kind of work your way through, and I just have some of the language from the beginning of the checklist and an example about the kinds of things that, again, this perfect educator would be able to check all of the checks off. Perfect issues education educator. And again, the URL for that is on the bottom of this slide. And I think, Marilyn, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you see yourself on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, this is from the book that Rod mentioned earlier that Scott Peters and others edited and pulled together. And Marilyn's profile was one chapter on this. And I think I will hand it over to you, Marilyn, to talk for a while about the topic. And I do have 2 of your slides in here.
Okay, that's great. Actually, you can put the first slide up. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate in this. This is a training that I think is very information for all extension educators to know about. My experience in this area probably began with training both through CARDI and Cornell's ILR staff over 10 years ago. And this included facilitation, an understanding of facilitation skills, effective communication, and conflict resolution training, as well as really understanding the community culture of the groups that I was working with. And this could be as simple as being able to structure an effective agenda to organizing a countywide strategic planning event. I want to establish, maybe the next slide would be good, and I don't know why I've been. This is just an overview of the points that I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so. But I wanted to establish some community demographics. The community that I work in is Greene County, and it has just over a population of 50,000. It's probably the least developed county in the Hudson Valley. But I also work regionally with rural and suburban populations, and a high percentage of that population are homeowners and landowners that are seasonal or weekend residents. So that provides a lot of opportunity for trying to bring diverse groups of people together to make some kind of decision. The case study that I want to talk about was the facilitation of an ad hoc town planning committee that occurred in our community in 2003. It's a particular project that I've had a conversation with David about, and he felt that would probably be a good illustration of some of the ways that extension educators have been working in this area in the past. I also want to say, I don't think when David was listing all of those roles that people, that extension educators perceive themselves to be playing, I was there with everybody saying, oh yeah, depending on the situation, I probably have all those I played all those different roles. But knowing that you have a certain script or a certain set of skills that you can refer to as you start into some of these processes, I felt to be extremely valuable because it gave me a framework to work in. So I really encourage people to continue to develop those skills. So this particular project occurred in February of 2003. Our Extension Association was approached by a member of what was called a zoning committee. And this isn't a zoning board, but the purpose was to assist in establishing the goals, objectives, and ultimate implementation of an ad hoc group, the members of which were appointed by a town supervisor. The group was convened by the town to help the community decide how to move forward on the issue of zoning. It was a very controversial issue. The current master plan that they had no zoning included, and in 2003, that master plan, the last time it had been established or revised was in the 1950s. So it was way overdue, and the community knew they had to do something, but they couldn't get past this concept or this topic of zoning. The committee that the supervisor established had 3 community members that were pro and 3 community members that were con. They also had 2 councilmen, again, one who was pro and one who was con. The skills that I felt were really needed in this process included conflict resolution, facilitation, and really understanding, the community culture and values, because these 2 groups were coming at this from opposite ends. And they wanted someone from Cooperative Extension to come in, at least at the initial convening of this ad hoc group, because they considered Extension to be non-biased, that neutral, sort of apolitical entity, and both the town supervisor and the appointed committee members were comfortable with this. What we ended up doing is, the first meeting, what I did was sort of establish ground rules, the idea that everybody was going to listen to everybody's perspective and everybody had the right to their opinion. It really helped provide a defined and safe environment for this group to move forward in. And then we started talking about what was the charge that, I asked them what was the charge that the town supervisor had given them. And I really wanted to clarify this because I felt that it was sort of fuzzy and people weren't sure exactly what they were supposed to accomplish. The charge basically asked the committee to determine whether or not the community town members understood some of the implications of zoning and then could decide whether or not they wanted to incorporate zoning into the town planning process. They had 5 to 6 months to accomplish this, and after at least 2 hours of discussing this, it was determined that the groups really, their initial task needed to be modified. They had assumed that the focus of their charge was going to be organizing speakers to come in and discuss the pros and cons of zoning, essentially have a debate. But what they came away with during this initial meeting was actually that they determined what was needed was the community to have a community-wide education on issues that influence planning of their town's future, which included understanding zoning, but it ended up being much more than that. And so that was sort of a position of agreement amongst all the committee members. One of the hopes as a result of this process was that it would lead to an updated master plan, which may or may not, which might or might not have included zoning, and it was also determined that they wanted Cooperative Extension to facilitate some of the assignments of the tasks for this committee and to help with the subsequent meetings. Let me see. Every meeting that was held subsequently had an agenda, and I think, again, it's very important that if you convene people, part of the process is that you have a really realistic agenda and that is something that you stick to. Holding the agenda is a very powerful position to be in. and that we always followed those guidelines and ground rules that were established in the first meeting. This really limited unproductive arguments because we could say, look, we're getting off topic, we've allowed you to express your opinion, and it ensured that no individual monopolized the discussion or got the group off track. Subsequent meetings involved reviewing tasks, and members updated the committee as to what had been accomplished. This included the promotion of 3 educational forums that the committee decided they needed to host that would focus on this idea of community planning. Again, having an agenda was extremely important because it kept them focused, and it also allowed us to make sure that we were accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish. They also requested that the Cooperative Extension moderate these public educational events. The group adopted the suggestion to have the chairperson of the group that everybody agreed to be the spokesperson for the group where the media was concerned, because they found that often when they got involved in these discussions, the media wanted to create a polarized situation. So if there was just one spokesperson for the group, the committee felt that it would help to avoid inaccurate information being publicized. And I thought it was something that the group came up with, and I thought it was an excellent idea. All the public education programs were held at the local elementary school because it was the focal point of the community and also was considered neutral. Over the next 3 months, the public education programs occurred. We had David Church, who was the then director of New York State Planning Federation. He provided a broad overview of the importance of community planning. He touched a little bit on zoning, but really talked about the changing demographics and how important it was for communities to invest in this planning process. What we ended up doing, too, with these educational presentations, which had somewhere between 75 and 100 people from the community attend, was that instead of having an open question and answer time, we distributed 3x5 cards so that people could write down their questions, and then we would forward them to the speaker, and the speaker would try to get through as many questions as he could, but then also promised to answer them individually. If somebody left their name and a phone number and address, we would make sure that each person felt that their particular issue or question had been addressed. And this also avoided any one individual monopolizing the floor, when they wanted to have their particular issue addressed. Also, each presentation was taped and was made available to any of the community members through the local library. The second presentation involved a lawyer who had expertise in planning and zoning issues from a neighboring community, and he gave an overview of zoning, including legal ramifications, and did some question and answers. And then the final presentation, and this all occurred within a period of 3 weeks. Every week there was another public education meeting. We had a video by Ed McMahon. It's called Balancing Nature and Commerce. And it was really a good video in that it provided the community the opportunity to realize that they had a lot of options concerning the way their community could develop. And also included in this third educational program was our county director of planning. And he really provided an opportunity for questions and answers specific to Greene County, which I think was very beneficial. The follow-up, after these 3 educational sessions occurred, the committee reconvened, and they decided they really wanted to design a community survey to determine whether the community should proceed with some kind of vision or planning process, because they felt that instead of moving forward, they really wanted to step back and get some community input. So it's really that sort of that participatory democracy, the opportunity for people to provide their voice to how the community should move forward. So Cooperative Extension, we help craft the survey. We organized volunteers to stuff envelopes. It really became a sort of a community initiative. Eventually the results of the survey were made public by August. I think we definitely came, right under the wire of our 5 to 6 month time period. This process eventually led to contracting with a consultant that assisted the town in revising their master plan and moving forward in their consideration of zoning. And they do now have a current master plan. It's a very good master plan. The only problem that I really see is the follow-up. If they follow up on a lot of the points of the plan that they have, it will be very good, but sometimes, it's not actually creating the plan, it's implementing the plan that becomes the challenge. So in summary of this particular project, the role that cooperative extension played, it wasn't meant to replace the job that a professional consultant would provide for communities that were looking to create or revise their master plan or zoning ordinances. We really became involved because there was a fear on some of the part of the members of the community and the members of the committee that the process was structured in a way that was going to lead to further polarization on the issue, or that people wouldn't be able to be included in the issue. And they wanted to avoid this by bringing in someone from the outside just to help facilitate it. Cooperative Extension has recognized the value that certain communication and facilitation skills provide their communities, help them and others navigate through a lot of these complex issues that, I think David and Heidi and Rod have been making reference to. Now, currently, the application that I'm probably using a lot of these skills with involves decision regarding land use, especially those impacting forests. I know Laurel Gaylor is also on this webinar, and right now, what we're trying to do at the Agroforestry Center, which is a regional entity, is to help negotiate some of these issues that will impact our forests and all the multiple values that they provide among private forest landowners, foresters, loggers, and environmentalists and agencies. So, the topic has shifted a little, but the challenge is still there. But I really think that that the skills and the understanding and the training that I got from those initial opportunities with CARDI have been used again and again and again, and I'm very thankful that I have them. So I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Maybe while other people are typing, if they do have questions, Marilyn, could you talk a little bit about what you see the risks and benefits for your organization of doing this kind of work might be, and how explicitly you and your director talk about these kinds of things, or did, at least when you were initially getting involved?
Sure. I think the risks are always being identified with a particular position. And if you find that that research or information that you're providing points in a certain direction, I think you're always going to be vulnerable to being associated with supporting a particular position. That's why I know one of the discussions you had was that you have to make a decision whether or not you're going to be there as a facilitator or a participant. Because when you're a facilitator, there were a number of times I really wanted to provide my own input, but it was really important to not get engaged, to make sure that I was representing really the positions that were being presented. So the risks, basically can be that you become identified with a particular group or a particular position. But I really feel that one of the strengths that Cooperative Extension has is that they, at least in the community that we're in, people trust us. They feel like that we really are trying to provide a balanced perspective on what's going on. So I think maybe it's just something that you have to balance as each issue and as each request is presented to you. You have to have a thoughtful discussion about the implications for that. But the benefits, I think, far outweigh the risks in that there are a number of situations where we've been asked to come in and facilitate discussions with organizations that are going through transitions, including the county. I mean, we facilitated a county-wide strategic planning process a number of years ago just to allow all components of community government and agencies to get together and understand how they interacted and where the overlap was and how they could move forward effectively. And there have been a number of community organizations that have asked us to provide those same kinds of skills and services. Currently, I'm involved with a town who's looking at how can they use their forests collectively as a community-wide asset and ensure that they don't compromise the sustainability of those forests. So, again, it was just automatic. People said, well, we should contact Cooperative Extension. I know that we've built a reputation where we can come in and provide some of these skills, and I think people trust us. I think they feel that we're not going to, we're going to try to provide a balanced process.
Carolyn, can you see Nancy Potter's question on the screen? Hey, I feel you've already answered it, or not. Would you like me to read it?
No, I can see it.
Okay.
Well, in particular, I think it's really, I don't know of any stakeholders who this has impacted in a negative way for us. I mean, most of the stakeholders that were involved were local municipal officials, and I know that other townships were following this because prior to this, there was a lot of media influence about this controversy. So I don't think that there were, if there was impact, it was really all in the positive. They continued to go through this process, though. In doing this community survey, I mean, we provided them, too, honestly, a free service in helping decide what the survey was going to be about and helping to distribute and collating the answers. So they realized that we were in it to help them and make a decision so that when they eventually did contract with somebody to come in and help revise their master plan, they had a lot of information to start with. So I think they saw it as a real asset and a real affordable asset at that.
And I just want to add that I think that it's probably obvious that broader community input, one of the things that has to be let go is the outcome. When you're there to do the best job you can of helping the group come to a good decision-making process, but you might not like personally what they decide at the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything else? Okay, I will. Feel free to type more questions in, and we'll see if Marilyn or any of the rest of us are appropriate to respond. I will just mention that there is a profile, which I think I mentioned, of Marilyn, including this case study and other material in the book Catalyzing Change that was earlier, and then I had a picture of a couple.
Right, and I actually typed up this particular experience as a case study. So if anybody would like it, I'd be happy to forward it to people.
Thanks, Marilyn. So again, you can either contact Marilyn directly, type it in now, or let us know.
Marilyn, if you just send it to Heidi,
Yes.
Heidi can just go ahead and send that out.
I know Heidi had requested it, but I sort of ran out of time.
That's
Okay.
fine. We have time.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to move. We have about a half hour left. I'm going to move on now to what I hope is a quick overview of the curriculum that the group of educators on the screen now has been working on for a while. I'm not really creating any of this curriculum. I'm serving in a role as kind of as a friendly critic. I'm familiar with what's going on. We have phone calls, group phone calls every month. I should point out that all of these people are essentially full-time. They don't have this title, but in effect, they're all full-time state specialists working on public issues education types of topics. So, I mean, the curriculum has fairly organically grown out of the sense, the earlier work that was done on skills and competencies. So once you've identified the skills and competencies you need to be a public issues education educator. It kind of makes sense to try and put together some training materials related to that. And that's this ongoing effort. I will point out it is draft, and it is also incomplete in terms of the different tracks that are involved here. Each of the tracks has multiple modules underneath them that are together. It is intended, all of these are intended, when completed, to be materials that are available for people around the country to use in doing their own trainings. So to some extent, this is so I'll just quickly tick them off. Introduction, I think that speaks for itself. I'll show you a little bit what's underneath all of these, but I just want to give you an overview of the whole curriculum. First slide. So there's an introduction. There's a focus on different kinds of process approaches and process skills. There's one of the tracks which I think for many of us is one of the most critical ones about situation assessment. It's really how to understand a situation, what's going on, what needs to be done, whether or not you are the person that's going to do them, and the related process design that goes along with that. Another very fundamental track, which is really around interpersonal skills and interpersonal skills in a public context, is the managing of human dynamics. A whole track basically on facilitation, another track on negotiation, a track, and I should say I will talk a little bit more about this module later, track 7, on handling scientific and technical information in contentious public issues. One of the reasons I'm going to talk about that more is because that's actually the only one that is 100% complete. It's been out streets for several years, and there's a track record of various people using it, although I haven't actually personally taught with it. And then the final one, which is the final track, which is also critical for most of us, and all the more so in times we're in, is essentially an evaluation track about how to measure and report the impacts of this kind of work, because that's not always so easy to do. It's not as straightforward as some other. I have to also say that when I was asked to do this, I wasn't sure how to not make going through a curriculum boring. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I kind of want to run this by you. I want you to kind of know that it's there, that I could share more with you if you want me to talk about something specific. Again, either put a question in the left or afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to any of you more about what status and details of some of these tracks are all about. So for right now, I'm just going to go fairly quickly. I don't think I really need to spend much time on the introduction, because a lot of that is related to what we've already been talking about here. It just gives you educational materials to work with a group on talking about these topics. And that's true for all of the tracks, really. Process approaches. Again, this is somewhat of an introductory session that talks about different approaches, mediation, negotiation, different kinds of forums, some of the tools that we had that long list of earlier, and trying to get a perspective on the range of choice that's out there and what these tools are really appropriate for or not appropriate for. And some sense of some basic theory of collaborative decision making and what interface negotiation is all about. Situation assessment and process design. I said earlier, I personally feel that this is one of the most important modules, and I actually use a lot of this material in training curriculum that we're doing out of Cornell, which I'll mention at the very end of this. Particularly identifying stakeholders, understanding the characteristics of conflict, assessing collaboration potentials. It's kind of like, how do you analyze? How do you use your brain to look at what's going on and think about what effective responses are going to be? this curriculum item on human dynamics, as you can imagine, this is a very large topic. And I had to cut out about half of what was in there just to get the type font maybe big enough so you might be able to see it. But this is really, again, about the whole role of emotions, the way people interact with each other in interpersonal context to begin with, but taking that into how does that influence how we interact with each other in public settings around controversial issues. And this is really, I think, really almost one of the fundamentals, trying to understand, this is really one of the fundamentals of being able to operate well in public contexts around this, both when you're pulling people aside in a tense situation to try and talk to them one-on-one, and also when you're in a facilitation. This is the foundation. It's not the skills of facilitation, but I think it's the foundation of sort of the interpersonal skills you need to have when you're people, which most of these goals are all about. Again, there is an entire curriculum in Track 5 on facilitating groups, and particularly facilitating groups that are trying to make decisions about things. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. Most of the skills overlap, whether you're just facilitating a discussion or whether you're facilitating one about making a decision, but there are some special things to take into account when you're trying to bring a group to a decision. A lot of it's about, again, about techniques. There are exercises. Something you can't do online very easily is really at the core of a lot of these issues, which is having the group you're working with do exercises, small group exercises of various kinds, and there's a lot of that in this model. Another whole track about principled negotiation. This is in a more formal context, trying to bring people into to making decisions about things where they're mutually interdependent. This draws heavily on negotiation theory and trying to inform what's being discussed here and taught here. Again, there is a lot of role playing here. There's a lot of new terminology to learn in this if you're not familiar with it. And there are negotiations that start with the two-party negotiation, just involving simple interactions between two people, and taking that into a much more complex situation, multi-party negotiations.
This calls to mind some of the skills for labor management discussions, right?
A lot of the theory that has gone into sort of negotiation literature does come out of labor management negotiations, but this is very explicitly in a community context rather than a labor context. There are a lot of special rules that apply to the labor context that aren't really there in a community. Track 7, this is the one I'm going to go into a little bit more next, so I'm going to skip it right now. I'll cover all of this. And the last track, again, is on evaluation. There's a lot of detail in this module, ranging from thinking about logic models and how they apply to how you would look for indicators of how you would evaluate critiques of logic models, the kinds of measurements that you look for, how to present the information, how to use the news media, so on and so forth. It's really, when this is done, it's one of the ones that's not completed. It should to many of us, and not just in terms of looking at public issues education programming, but I would think also for other kinds of programming as well. Okay, I'm going to go back just to a little bit more to give you a little bit of a feel for one of the tracks, the one on scientific and technical information. Again, this is available PDFs, and there is also PowerPoint slide material that's available in relation to this module. There are 3 basic booklets that are available. One is an instructor's guide. They actually have a lot of the same material in each of them, but they're presented in different ways and with kind of different amendments to them. So I'm not going to go through the same material in each of these guides, but they're written essentially for different audiences. So one is for the instructor. Another one is for the educators that are the presumed participants in the program. You'll notice that a lot of the bulleted topics there should be familiar with some of the subjects we've been talking about earlier in terms of competencies related to negotiation, to process design, and so on and so forth. And then the third document I'm going to show you just a little bit more about here in a little more detail that kind of shows you how it's divided up into separate modules. It has visuals, it has handouts, and it has case scenarios, in this case 3 of them, that are used for the groups to refer to as, for the small groups to refer to as they're working through the issues during the session. Now, each of these modules can last from 1 to 3 hours. So this is going through this entire curriculum, I should say, would be a very heavy commitment time for someone who wasn't very serious about it. However, all of the tracks are designed to work fairly well independently of each other, and some of the modules also work fairly well independently. So since it's already 1/4 after, I don't think I'm going to spend too much time. It would probably be too boring anyway to really go into any of the specifics, what's in each of these modules. I think if you want to look at this, you'll get a flavor for it, and if you want to look more at it, I could actually send you this whole module if you want. I could talk to you about it as well.
Is the module on that public issues education website?
The module, not all of these pieces are available. Part of it is and part of it isn't. But I could, if anybody is interested in it and can't find it, I could get you. And this, I should say, was this particular one, which is completed, was put together by Kay Holland from Washington and Steve Smutko from North Carolina. And they're also great resource people. They'd be happy to talk to me about how to use these in more detail. I'm just going to breeze through. These are actually some of the material from some of the slides that are associated with this. Again, this is not a training itself, so I'm not going to talk about what these here. I'm just going to kind of let you absorb the kind of topics that are included in some of these modules by looking at these. And some of this will be material. There's supplemental information that goes along with all of these slides. The roles, a little bit of sense about it. And this, I should also mention, if I haven't, this is written just like this webinar. This is kind of, in some sense, focused on, but not exclusive to, the domain of cooperative extension. So there is a lot of, when the term "our" is used, as it is here, it refers to cooperative extension plus other people who are educators. I don't see Bev's question. What is this?
She said you might have already talked about it. How can we take
Okay. At the moment, you cannot work through the entire curriculum because it's not completed. However, the hope of this group is probably by the end of this year, the hope is that it will all be completed by the end of the year. I think if you're interested, I think the most practical thing to do if you're really interested in some or all of this would be to talk to me, in a phone conversation, and I could sort of help you figure out how to use it, because it's also, some of the material that's not completed is pretty close to being usable anyway. It's not sort of in polished form. Many of these modules are pretty far along already, so I think with the conversation with the individual who's developing that module, it would probably be possible to use the existing material on probably all but 1 or 2 of these. I hope that answered your question. Again, this is more just about the problems, specifically dealing with very technical issues, the role of information. And one of the reasons this was finished first is because I think it's a particularly high salience for educational institutions to be able to understand how to work with controversial issues that involve scientific and technical information.
I've had a follow-up to that.
Follow up, okay,
Which was
thank
just,
you.
is this independent?
I don't understand what you mean by independent work, so maybe you could clarify that, Bev? If it means independent in the sense of each individual is developing these modules separately, so there are 8 modules and a person is developing them, but we're all kind of looking over their shoulders as they develop them, and my role is in particular to keep them. I'm one of the not developing a module myself. So if you have a different question, that can answer.
It may also be students take that independently. I mean, can they go through the curriculum?
I think the goal will eventually be to make all of this available on the website. I think it will need somebody. It's not intended to be a self-study entirely, although it could probably be used that way. Would probably need somebody to take responsibility for working a group as the public issues education educator.
Well, one of the things that we can explore, if there seems to be interest in the system for these modules, is figure out a way to kind of structure some group check-ins, if, not with all, probably 8 modules, but if there is interest in a couple of them. So we can explore that down the road.
So due to the time, I just skipped over the additional material that's in there. There's a lot. And I just wanted to end with a short section on a program that CARDI is very involved in promoting that doesn't incorporate the modules directly, but incorporates a lot of the ideas which are in the modules into a curriculum, and it particularly incorporates the conflict and process design elements. It was the 3rd module, if I'm remembering right. So this is a program that we're partnering with the Pace University Land Use Law Center and the Albany Law School to provide. We're just about to sign up about that partnership. It was developed initially by Pace University, and we've now been working with them for well over a year and adapting and delivering it. It involves an interactive training. Participants have to commit 4 full days over a month or 2 to this training, so it's a fairly high-touch, interactive, and intensive training that they have to be committed to. People that participate are by invitation only. They're invited in collaboration with a planning group that's pulled together. Some of those members of the planning group participate, some don't. They're invited to participate in land use. They're identified essentially as land use leaders, and there's a very deliberate effort to get a diverse group from on a regional basis to participate. It involves landowners, environmental group leaders, planning board members, elected board members, etc. There's not really depends on where you are, who are the kinds of people that are most obvious to invite. The goal of this is to help the participants understand the legal foundations and structure of New York State's land use system. That's where the law school connections add an enormous amount of depth to this curriculum. But the reason I and CARDI were attracted to it is because it integrates that kind of information with Second bullet here, appreciating the importance and role of collaborative community decision-making, conflict management skills, we might add public issues education skills, and attaining sustainable community development. The people are taught to integrate both of these kinds of knowledge and skills together in a public issues education kind of format, curriculum. And a very explicit final goal of this is to develop a group, to develop the network, really, people who have a common vocabulary, a common experience within a region, and also as part of a larger group within the state that have gone through this training, so that we've developed relationships between people who, while they may not agree on policy issues, have a language to refer to and a way of thinking about things we've all been exposed to, as well as a common set of knowledge about the. So we have the photo in here, which is covering up part of the text, is from one of the sessions that Pace and Cornell did in the Keuka Lake watershed. It was actually initiated and organized by the director of extension there, Peter Landry. Really, judging from their evaluations, it was really a big hit. We actually did 2 of them because there were it all in one session. There were about 25 to 40 people in each session. So there they are again. See, they're all smiling. And that's kind of it.
We have one question that you would ask us. Let me go back up to.
I'm just changing on you to make it easier.
Okay.
Maybe?
Okay. So, Amy, where's it going? We're moving as fast. Bear with us 1 minute. Paul's helping me out here.
There you go.
Okay, great. Thank
Okay.
you. So, no.
I
Well-
think the best example of that right now
Yes.
is the Marcellus Shale, which impacts several counties in, especially the southern tier and over to as far as Delaware. So we are trying to backstop our extension educators who are certainly on the front lines of addressing landowner issues, community issues. There's certainly controversy about whether gas leasing and drilling would spoil the environment, whether it's because it has the potential to be an economic development boom. So there's different perspectives on this. So I think that what we're trying to do from Central Campus is to provide training for extension educators involved in this issue. We put together an excellent web-based resource that's there, and we're trying to present balanced information. It really is very much, we've actually had several conversations about wanting to take a public issues education approach to the issue of the Marcellus Shale. So I think, Amy, that's one example where we're trying to provide support and resources from Central Campus, even though we know many of the questions and issues are playing out at a municipal level. David or Paul, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that for that particular issue, Marcellus Shale.
I don't have anything about the Marcellus Shale, but I would just add that I think this is perhaps an obvious, but certainly an excellent question, because I don't think you can do public issues education, freelancing it very easily. I think that you do have to have institutional support to be able to be successful doing it, and that's not always available. That's part of the specific context in the county you're in. And people have, particularly within extension, in the research we did, it was very clear that both extension boards and county legislatures, and we interviewed people from in both of those categories, they have expectations of what educators should be doing and should not be doing, and almost everybody who still has a job is smart enough to know where those boundaries are. I will point out that I'm sure that those change over time too, and you can push the envelope a bit with the kind of work you do, but it's going to be different in every county. in terms of the degrees of freedom that you have.
Question to our association board and program committee.
About which now?
About public issues education.
Well, I would say, there was a pretty strong effort in the mid-90s to inform people. I think as Rod kind of introduced, I think that it's been, at least the term, if not the practice, has been kind of fading away into the background. And this is an effort. Unless Rod will correct me, I don't see a specific concerted programmatic effort to reintroduce public issues education per se. The way I see it happening is more that a lot of these ideas are being integrated into certain program areas, at least within CARDI. I think that's the case.
I think that would be safe to say. That's not to say that if there would be value in putting together a 1 or 2 page paper that associations can use for board members and program do that, pointing to some of the things that were highlighted in this webinar.
Paul, you also.
Well, I was just thinking, going back to Scott's book, if you look at Catalyzing Change,
Right.
there are countless stories of public issues education happening in there. They may not be directly in the guise of that. It may not be what you call it when you do it, but it is a large part of what Cornell Cooperative Extension does in communities.
Yeah, I think what's missing, and maybe this is what David was referring to, is we used to actually have, and certainly Scott Peters is still an embodiment of this to some extent, but we don't have a key faculty member who talks about it in the way that was talked about in the past.
We used to have a PWT, program work team.
But what's there is this national group who keeps slowly developing material. So I don't think it was lost. I just think we haven't talked about it. We haven't talked about it up front as much as we used to talk.
Well, but Bev's question about integrating the modules into some sort of online learning component would really offer an opportunity if the system decided it was a valuable thing to focus on. I'm not sure, David, can we work with the public issues education? We don't drop them into an online course?
Yeah, again, I think because it's not completed, although it's not completed, I think we have to negotiate with each of the authors about that. But the intention, which would be a lot farther, by the way, if there had been more funding for these guys, they're doing essentially all of this work on the side. There was a small amount of funding that came from
CSRE,
yes.
Right.
But not nearly as much as had initially been hoped for to sort of take this all the way through to web-based modules. So it's kind of happening now when people have space in their lives to move forward.
Okay, we're at about 3:33, so I want to wrap up. If you do have additional questions, I'm going to take the liberty of guessing that our presenters would be willing to share or address those. If you want to email them to me, I can pass them on, and they would probably follow up with you. I just want to thank you all for joining us again, particularly given the technical challenges that we had with our online registration form. So thanks to those of you who took the time to register directly. We're hoping that'll be eliminated soon. And I just, again, want to have a collective virtual round of applause and thanking David, Rod, Marilyn, and Paul for their time and insights today. I also just want to let you know that you'll receive an email from me later on today with a link to an evaluation of today's webinar, and we ask that you really take that seriously. This is the second that we've done in the series, and your feedback will be really helpful in making sure that the series meets your needs. And part of that is if you have ideas for future topics, we welcome them. Along with that mailing, we'll also send you a link to the online archive of this session in case you want to view it again or share it with colleagues. And finally, the email will include information to link to further information about other webinars in the series, and we'll also include the follow-up materials that we mentioned today. So again, thank you, and we'll be signing off.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Marilyn.
Bye, Marilyn. Thank you very much.
Bye, Rod. Bye, Heidi. Take
Good
care.
work.
Bye, Paul.
Keep
was
it
great.
up.
Bye.